you don't forget the number one most important thing. Okay, Andy, thank you so much for joining in and for offering to come on. It was really great. When I saw your talk at the UX Australia conference, I was like, I really want to reach out to this guy. I really do. It was probably my favorite talk from the entire day. It's the first in-person conference I had ever been to. And one of the reasons why I loved your talk was it had spoken really to something that I'd felt across my entire, all of my time in design. And it was this gap or this cognitive dissonance almost between the promise I had heard of design in books and this almost putting design on a pedestal and the reality of design in practice and in relation to all the other disciplines around it, in creating companies and building products and making experiences. And you called it, design's midlife crisis. Could you maybe introduce yourself and then maybe give us a little bit of a why midlife crisis? I think those two things. You first, of course. Oh, I think you're on mute, Andy.
I am indeed. Sorry about that. Yeah, so for folks that haven't come across me before, my name is Andy Bird. I'm a UX designer. Well, actually, I started my career more, back in the late early 90s, I guess, when the internet was kind of fairly young, where you had to be a bit of everything. So you had to be a front-end coder, you had to be a back-end person, you had to be a visual designer. Back when we were all kind of like web designers or web developers. I started actually doing a lot of work in Flash. I used to love Flash programming, making little Flash object-oriented games when in Flash 4 it was quite difficult to do with ActionScript. But really quickly, I discovered this thing called CSS, Web Standards. Back in the day when I started, there were no browsers that supported CSS. And then along came IE 5.5 on the Mac, which is maybe 2001. And that was the first browser that you could build things using CSS. And so I built, I think, the third ever CSS website in the UK. I wrote a book called CSS Mastery, which was the third ever book on CSS. And for a very short period of time, maybe like a month or so, was outselling Harry Potter on Amazon. That was basically when people bought books rather than did cohort-based courses online. So CSS Mastery was a best sort of seller and went through several iterations. And so I really had this kind of focus at the time. There was a move away from inaccessible Flash files into well-structured data. There was a move towards standardization, the web standards movement, away from companies trying to dominate the space with their own proprietary code. Back in the day when I started, you might have to create 3 or 4 different versions of your website for 3 or 4 different browsers. It was absolutely nightmare. I don't know how long many of your audience members have been programming for, but it's so much easier now not having to think about kind of which rendering engine my website is rendering for, maybe having to make 2 or 3 different versions. And so web standards was a big part of that. I started an agency in 2005 called Clear Left. At the time, we thought about maybe becoming a web standards agency, but I was aware that web standards was going to become the default way of building to the point that no one would even care anymore. So it wasn't going to be a differentiator for long. But there was this new thing bubbling up that people had variously called like user experience design, user-centered design. And there was one other agency in the world doing this time at the moment called Adaptive Path. And they were based in San Francisco. And I was like, well, this UX thing I think is going to be really big. I'm going to start our agency and we're going to be the first UX agency in arguably the UK or Europe. At the time, there were like information architecture companies, there were usability companies, there were traditional branding companies, but there wasn't anyone bringing it all together under the umbrella of user experience. So I started like I say, it was arguably the first UX company in the UK and Europe. I started one of the first design conferences called Deconstruct, arguably the first digital design conference in the UK. I started UX London, which was the first UX conference in the UK in 2009. And then I think maybe in 2014 15 or 16, I started leading design, which was a design leadership conference, which all of these have been going still on to today. About 2 or 3 years ago, I decided to leave my company, my agency, and so we sold it to the team. So the company now still exists, the conferences are still going on, but it's now owned by all of the people that make the company amazing. You know, didn't want to sell it to some overseas tech company, didn't want to kind of have it like shut down or the brand disappear and everyone, you know, kind of remember like, oh, where was Clear left? They used to be a cool company 3 or 4 years ago. So we had a kind of an employee ownership trust built. And then after stepping away from the agency world a little bit, one thing I feel really strongly about is trying to unlock the power of design. And so this is why I run an agency, because I wanted to go into companies and help them get value from design. This is one of the reasons why I run conferences and I spoke at conferences, because as an agency founder, maybe I can help 10 companies, 20 companies, 30 companies a year get the value from design. But if I go and stand on a stage and talk to 500 people or 1,000 people, if I run 2 or 3 or 4 conferences, I can talk to maybe 5,000 people. I can have a much bigger impact in helping unlock the power of design through all of those things. But we've got to a level of maturity, and one of the things we're going to talk about in our talk today is around kind of where the industry came from, where it is now, and the level of maturity. And so I realized that, like, in order to kind of like carry on trying to elevate design, I needed to move away from the agency world and I needed to do something different. And so I've leaned into 2 things. So these days, I act as a coach, and I coach heads, directors, and VPs of design. So I've got people, some of the people I coach have got relatively small teams, maybe 2 or 3 designers. Some of the people I've coached over the past year have got 200-person design teams. But all of them are struggling with the same problem, which is I have been hired to use design to improve the outcomes of my company, but for various reasons, I feel like I'm handcuffed. I'm not able to deliver the work at the level of quality that I want to do that. Maybe my product bosses don't appreciate me, or my CTO doesn't appreciate me, or the owner of the company doesn't really understand design. They think it's making things look pretty rather than solving problems. And so I need to get better at kind of promoting design within the organization. And so I'll have at any one time maybe a dozen or so people I'm helping, and helping them navigate internally how they can raise a profile of design, and also raise their own profile, and also help with their own career. Because a lot of design leaders are feeling a little bit stuck, and I get onto the midlife crisis thing in a second, and they're wanting to unblock themselves. So that's one angle of what I'm doing at the moment. The other angle is, okay, one of the reasons these design leaders are stuck is because their bosses, their companies don't believe in design. I can help them improve that relationship, but it's like that uphill struggle. If you've been a successful business for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, trying to convince somebody that they need to invest in design when they've never invested in design before is really tough. And so my thinking was, well, what if I can get in early? What if I can actually meet and help and support those founders in the formative years, so that an appreciation of the value design is baked in from the start? So I have become a VC, a venture capitalist. So I work in a very well-known seed stage fund in the UK called CCamp. I work for them 2 days a week, and I do my coaching 2 days a week. And through CCamp, I get to work with dozens and dozens of high promise, high caliber, fast-moving startup founders, where I can help them because we've given them money. I'll write them a check for $1 million. And it's suddenly amazing. If you write a check for $1 million, people start taking you seriously. And they start listening to what you've got to say. And so I have the opportunity to help. It's not my money, by the way. It's my LPs, it's the fund's money. I wish I could be writing checks for $1 million, but we will write a check for $1 million. And that gives me some legitimacy that when I say to people, hey, look, you should be thinking about the design thing. You should be talking to customers. You should be doing customer development. You should be investing not only in how the product looks, but how it works, how it feels. That you are not going to win if you're creating a Me Too product. You need to create an exemplary customer experience. In order to draw people over from these bigger companies, you need to be thinking this way. And over time, sometimes I don't even mention design, but over time, people start to realize that design is an important function, and that often it's a route to success, particularly early stage companies. I'm a strong believer that the way you get to product market fit, which is what all these early stage companies are trying to get to, is through design, through user experience, through solving meaningful problems. It's rarely through engineering these days. It is sometimes through marketing and sales to some extent, because you need to have the volume of people coming through your system. But it's definitely through design playing a key role. And my hope is that if I can help these founders get design baked in from the start, if I can help them find their first designer, their second designer, their third designer, if design becomes one of the reasons why they're successful, then I won't have to worry about all my coaching clients, because I won't be having to teach them how to navigate this, because they will now be joining companies that already have this baked in. And then lastly, what if it wasn't other people starting these companies? What if it was other designers? What if, rather than waiting around for a business person or a CTO or a marketer, what if it was us designers taking our own agency? What if we were starting those companies? And so I am all about trying to help designers who feel stuck, who feel blocked, who feel that design isn't valued, to say, hey, look, like, you don't need to be in this position anymore. You can go out and you can start your own business, you can start your own venture. And there are people, increasingly people like me out here, people like the Designer Fund, people like Character VC. There are more and more venture people who come from a design background who appreciate what you can bring. And if your boss isn't appreciating that, then come and start your own thing, and there'll be people out there that can back you. So that was a very long-winded introduction to who I am and what I'm doing at the moment.
I love it. I love it. As someone who comes not from, I started in programming and also worked my way into, I discovered design through startup accelerators, actually. So I joined like a business thing, and I saw people using sticky notes, and I was like, what is this? This is so cool, the way they're moving, and, you know, finding what works by going and actually talking to people. And I definitely, a lot of our community members have had these similar experiences around struggling in existing companies. I myself am in a government company right now in the day, and they're quite an old regulator in the aviation field. So getting them to change is incredibly interesting as an experience. Where does the midlife crisis come into this?
Well,
Design's midlife crisis.
Yeah. Just backing up a second. I didn't realize you worked in the aviation industry.
Yeah.
As a little aside, my degree was actually in aeronautical engineering. Ooh. And I'm a pilot. So one of my hobbies is flying, and so maybe there's an opportunity for us to chat a little bit about that, either on this call or afterwards. I'd love to know more about what you're doing. But in terms of the midlife crisis, through my coaching and through the conferences I run and speaking to lots of design leaders, I've just found that design leaders keep coming back to the same set of problems. Like, how do I raise the profile of design in my organization? How do I get people to take design seriously? How can I have a better impact on you know, what we can do as designers? And I came to the realization that one of the real blockers, as you mentioned in the intro, is that I think designers have been taught that design is at the center of everything. You often see these kind of Venn diagrams where design and UX is at the center of kind of business and product and marketing, or whatever it is, and, you know, technology. And so we've been taught that, like, actually we're the ones that should be in charge. We should be making all the decisions. We should be driving everything forward. And you get taught this if you go to classes, if you go to conferences. Every talk you see is around how we are the most important people in our organizations, and everyone should listen to us. And so you go into the marketplace, you go into the workplace, having this belief that we are the center of everything. And then suddenly you come across people that don't believe you're the center of everything. You come across technical people that think actually technology is the center of everything. You come across marketing people who think, no, marketing is the center of everything. Like, it doesn't matter how well the product works. If you've not got customers coming to it, it ain't worth anything. And so marketing is the most important thing. Or sales, again, same problem. And so suddenly we have this weird existential crisis where what we've been taught to believe suddenly starts not manifesting. And so we fight because we know this to be true. We know that we're important. We know the center of everything. And so we start getting arguments. We start getting arguments with our peers. We start telling product, well, we should be doing the research, not you. We start telling product, well, we should be coming up with the features, not you. We start telling the business, well, how dare you tell me what to build? I tell you what to build. And weirdly, this backfires. Weirdly, when you tell your CTO or your CEO, I tell you what to build, the CEO goes, well, hold on a second. Like, I'm employing you, I'm paying you your wages. We've decided what to build, and you're a servant of the business, not the other way around. And this fight, this barrier starts to kind of really, really grate. And so the other thing I see, again, what I talk about in the midlife crisis talk is we've been taught things like how it's our job to do customer discovery. Like, don't come to me with a feature to build, come to me with a problem. And I will go out there and I will spend a day, a week, a month discovering what the right solution is. And I will come back to you and I'll tell you what the solution is. And you will embrace me in open arms and you'll carry me on your shoulders and everything will be amazing and perfect and everything will be good in the world. And so we go into relationships where we think that, and then we're really surprised when product comes and says, well, I've done the customer discovery and this is what we've decided to build. Or maybe sales comes and says, hey, look, in order to close this $1 million deal, we need to deliver this feature. And we go, well, how dare you? How dare you tell me what to build? I tell you what to build. And so over the years, you go from being a junior designer who's very opinionated and has this kind of like singular worldview that they're the center of everything, to suddenly realizing, hold on, maybe you're not the center of anything at all. Maybe actually something else is going here. Maybe what I've been taught throughout my career is a lie. And this is effectively what a midlife crisis is. A midlife crisis is people being told that they're going to live forever or thinking they're going to live forever and suddenly going, oh shit, I might only have 10, 20 years, 30 years worth of life left. People being taught that like their role in society is to kind of work and provide and have kids, and suddenly the kids go home and you're like, wow, what have I left? What am I left with? Like, I've spent all of my energy into these other people, these other companies, these other individuals, and I've kind of lost sight of myself. And so that midlife crisis is often a time to reflect and go, what is the reality here? And how does it differ from what I've been told? And what do I want to do? And how do I want to kind of move forward? And so when I meet a lot of these designers in crisis, it is trying to square what they've been taught with the reality and where they want to go next. And so, yeah, that talk was all around that kind of struggle and that challenge and some of the coping mechanisms. You know, I think ethics is a big coping mechanism in a good way. You know, I would rather us designers be leaning into ethics than going and buying Lamborghinis or having affairs or having a drinking or gambling problem. But we look to kind of philosophical frameworks to help guide us. If I have spent all my career building products to sell more fizzy drinks or to sell, you know, more clicks to a big advertising company, and that hasn't filled me with joy and with satisfaction, maybe I need to start thinking about ethical frameworks in order to navigate this. What can I do with my next 10, 20 years of my career whereby I can do good in the world? Maybe rather than just, you know, not doing bad, but kind of maybe just not doing much at all. And so the talk was all around that. I don't want to kind of just reenact the talk on this call. It is online if you just search for Andy Budd and Designs Midlife Crisis. There were videos up there that you could kind of watch. But yeah, that was the kind of the key philosophy behind that. And effectively, sorry, just to wrap up, a big part of that is having some emotional intelligence, understanding the reality of the situation you're in rather than the ideal situation, being a little bit more willing to compromise, and understanding business. You applying our empathy. Like, designers are so good at applying empathy to our customers, to our users, but often we don't apply the same empathy to our business partners. So as a designer, can I help navigate my company by understanding what they need and by making sure that I deliver that in our products? And I gain the reputation and the ability to influence, not by arguing with people. Like, again, this is a classic thing. What happens, I see this all the time with the people I coach, is they're like, Andy, like, I've been I've been invited to give 30-minute presentation to the founders at the yearly annual retreat. I'm going to go in, I'm going to write the deck that changes their mind. I'm going to have some amazing quotes from Jared Spall about the $1 billion or $100 million button. I'm going to have an amazing graph about the performance of design-led companies like Airbnb and Apple. And I'm going to prove to them in 30 minutes that design is going to be our savior. And so they go in and they give this presentation. It's lovely. And everyone goes back to the regular day-to-day business. And so you can't convince people that design is important through a 30-minute presentation. What you can do is you can show to your bosses that using the lens of design is a great way to help them reach their business goals. So maybe their business goals, maybe they've got a problem whereby there's too much churn. Too many people are dropping out the process. You know, you want a company, you want a client to stay with you for a customer to stay with you for 2 or 3 years, but they're only staying for a year or 8 months. What can I use? How can I use design to solve that problem? And then if you can solve that problem and you can make that metric move, and then you can demonstrate to your boss that you did that through design, they're going to go, oh, we hadn't thought about that. We were thinking it was an engineering problem. We were thinking it was a sales and marketing problem. We didn't realize it was a design problem. Here's another problem you could solve. And then you solve that. And then that, and then the next one, the next one, the next one. And all of a sudden, people are coming to you to solve their problems, and you're growing in status. And so next time when you say, hey, look, I don't think we should do X, we should do Y, people will listen to you because you've got a track record of being somebody that delivers value. If all you do is argue the powers of design, the ivory tower approach, then what happens, and I see this all the time, is design becomes a blockage to people want to work around. I meet marketing people, I meet salespeople, I meet product people who all go, oh, I don't really want to talk to the design team, because every time I talk to them, the answer is, we need to do 2 months worth of research and I need to do 15 prototypes. And I just need to get this thing launched next week because I've got a deadline and I've got my boss breathing down my neck. And so I'm just going to go externally. I'm going to hire an agency. I'm going to knock it up myself in balsamic. I'm going to get the engineers to do it using a code kit because they can knock it together and it looks decent, and I don't have to talk to the designers who are a bit of a pain in the ass. And so, like, that's not the world you want to be in. You want to be in a world where that product manager is going, shit, you know, that designer really saved my bacon. I'm going to go to them time and time and again.
I love it. I love it. I think we just had a comment from Sarah. She's a long-term fan. She first listened to you at your design leaders speech. And she's got 2 burning questions, which we can get to at the end if you'd like after your session.
Go for it.
Awesome. Do you want them now, or we can do later?
This is your show. I'm just a humble guest, so I'm happy to do whatever you'd like to do.
Cool. Let's go with Sarah's questions, and I'd like to hear kind of, you know, the topic around that we've got is the movement from a calling to a profession. Sarah has asked. Sarah, would you like to ask it? Actually, I always like to hear you on.
Yeah, sure. So, Andy, I'm a long-term fan, let's say. Nice to meet you in person as well. So the first time I come across was, I think it was either AW Awards or Webflow conference where you did a speech on design leadership, which was 3 years ago, and it wasn't the main conversation around at that time. So as I see it, you are a future teller, let's say forecaster. So my question is a little bit revolving around that. Well, where do you see the near future is design heading to beyond this machine learning and artificial intelligence and its implications? Where do you think the core of the trend is heading to, so we can, well, level ourselves with that forecast of yours? That's the first one.
Well, let's stick with the first one now, because I've got a bit of a goldfish brain and I probably won't be able to keep the second question in my head. So let's do the first one. I think this is a really interesting question. My answer, though, might not necessarily be the most uplifting answer, but I'll kind of explain my position. So I genuinely think we have reached peak design. If you understand, there's this idea of peak oil, that it doesn't necessarily mean that the supplies have run out yet, but we have hit the most, arguably, the most available oil in the world, and the stocks are going down. I think the same is true of design. I think we've hit peak design. I think 2 or 3 or 4 years ago in the UK at least, and I think in the US as well, there was an insatiable demand for designers. I was seeing design teams growing really, really fast. I was seeing a lot of designers be given, I hate to use military terms, but like battlefield promotions. It's like our team has grown so quickly. We need to make our lead a design manager because they need to kind of manage 3 or 4 people. But also, we need to make our design lead a manager because if we don't make them a manager, they'll leave to somewhere else and someone else will give them the title of design manager. So I think there was a massive inflation of job titles to satisfy the huge demand and a desire to keep hold of people who were talented. And so I think we've seen more design leaders minted in the last 3 or 4 years than ever before. And I think we've seen bigger design teams. I think the reckoning happened after the pandemic, after everything kind of got back to normal, whereby I think a lot of companies felt that overhired. I think we were struggling a little bit with the economy and the kind of the repercussions of that. And we've seen sadly, in the last 12 months, between probably last Christmas and this Christmas, a big level of redundancy. I have not seen so many talented design leaders, and I'm sure designers as well, on the market for as long as I think ever in my history. So I think we've hit a kind of a peak. And I think that peak is for a couple of reasons. So I think that partly our inability to play ball with our bosses, with our product designers, with our product managers, with our CTOs, with our marketing people, has meant that a lot of the things that used to be us designers used to think that we owned, have been given to somebody else. So designers used to think we're responsible for research. But now, if you look at most companies, research has been rebranded as customer discovery, and it's being done by product people. I think that's a branding thing to some extent. I think while designers were arguing with themselves over what the right number of people to have on a usability test or how to do ethnographic research, from an academic point of view, I think product managers have said, oh, I'll just have a couple of phone calls with people and I'll decide. Now, I don't think product managers at the moment are doing a good job of research, but it doesn't matter because they have owned that space. It's much, much harder, I think, for designers to do formative research. We can do summative research, but not formative research. I think we have put an awful lot of effort into design systems. I think design systems are wonderful. But also what design systems are a way of componentizing and therefore commoditizing design. I meet lots of design teams, I meet lots of product teams now who are a year or 2 years into their startup and they don't have a designer. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have thought, well, show me your website, it's going to be terrible. And 5 or 10 years ago, they would have shown me their website and it would have been terrible. Now I look at the website and like, actually, it's pretty good. And why is it pretty good? Well, it's pretty good because they've used a UI kit. They've used a whole bunch of pre-existing components. And yes, sure, you can smell the UI kits from a mile off, but only if you're a designer. If you're a designer and you look at a website that's been built with a UI kit, you go, oh, it's not quite perfect, but it's good enough. And so I'm seeing a lot of engineers doing early stage design work. I'm seeing a lot of product managers going, oh, well, our designers are really busy. They're busy shipping it updates. I will get hold of a copy of Balsamic. I'll get hold of a sketchbook and a sketch pad, and I will sketch out what the product should look like. And, 10 years ago, that would have been a designer doing that. But that would have been a designer saying, we need to wireframe this. Designers spent the last 10 years saying to everyone, wireframes are rubbish. Don't touch wireframes. What's happened? That's great. Wireframes have been taken out of our hand, even if they might be rubbish, and now product managers are doing it. So a lot of the arguments we've been having internally, like that have been these kind of like, how many angels dancing on the head of a pin kind of pointless arguments, have, I think, detracted from us building a really, really good branding for what we do and explaining the value for what we do, because we can't even decide the value. And so we've handed that ability over to other people. So the box that we operate in has become smaller and smaller. We're not doing research. We're not doing prototyping. We're not doing discovery. We are doing more and more UI work. And actually, we're not even doing UI work because we've got a design team that builds the UI kit. We are assembling tools. So if you take this to the logical extension, so the logical extension, even without AI, is if I've got a design system and I have a tool where a non-designer can now start assembling, not as a wireframe, but using our UI components, why do I need a designer? And so I think in the next 3 or 4 years, we are going to see Figma or tools like Figma being used more and more in the hands of product leaders and product managers who will be able to assemble designs out of the component parts. And then what you'll have is you'll have a small number of designers who are managing the design system and a small number of designers doing the mopping up kind of low-level design work that most of us don't want to do. But sadly, all the high-level UX thinking will be out of our hands and will be being delivered by product people, product managers who will actually be assembling all the bits and pieces. So I think AI is only going to advance this, because now not only can you assemble from the pieces, but you can start having a dialogue with your AI that will help you make that assemblage even quicker, which means I don't think it will be particularly good, but it means you don't even need to have tool skills. You don't need to know how Figma works. I think the last frontier for designers is we understand how Figma works. Everything's built in Figma. We understand how Figma works. As soon as you have an agent that allows you to pull components from your design system and assemble it in Figma, where you don't even need to know how Figma works because it's a chat interface, I think we're going to see, not in the next 2 years or the next 5 years, but the next 10 or 20 years, less and less designers needed. And so I think we've hit peak design, unfortunately. The way I describe it to people mostly is 200 years ago in my town of Brighton, if I wanted to buy a chair, I would have had to go to the carpenter who would have made a chair to order for my needs, and it would have been a beautiful chair, but it would be really expensive. So all of the peasants in the town would have only been able to hire one chair, and you go into the lord of the manor. The lord of the manor will have 50 chairs because they can afford it. The same thing happened with design. Like 10, 20 years ago, if you wanted to have a website, you would have to go and commission a designer who would build it from scratch. You'd commission a front-end person who would code it from scratch. You'd commission an engineer who would develop it from scratch. Now, you go to a lower skilled technician who will go and get a Wix template for you and customize a Wix template, or maybe not even that. Maybe you'll do it yourself. You'll go and you'll build this tool, and in 2 or 3 years' time, you'll be doing it with AI. So that whole class of your local designer disappeared. They got subsumed into the bigger companies. So what happens now is, you don't go and get a chair commissioned. You go to Habitat, you go to IKEA, and IKEA will maybe have 20, 50, 100 freelance designers that each will design one chair, and then they will replicate that chair 1,000, 10,000, 1 million times. You will still need designers, but you won't need one designer or one carpenter, 10 carpenters, 50 carpenters for every town. You will need 50 carpenters, 50 chair designers for every major company. So I think we have seen peak design, and I think we're falling off the other side. To combat that, I'm seeing a lot of designers moving to product leadership. So a lot of the more senior UX people who want to be more strategic, want to carry on doing strategy, they've put down their lasso tools and they have moved into becoming product leaders, looking at people like Peter Merholz. Peter Merholz was the founder of Adaptive Path. He was arguably one of the first UX designers. Now he spent the last 10 years working as a product leader, and I'm seeing a lot of that. So I think this is it. I think we are going to see a lot of UX people move into product. I think we're going to see a lot of UI people move into design system management. And I think there's going to be a hollowing out of the middle. And I think this is what AI does in general. AI hollows out the middle of systems. We're not going to lose the high-end lawyers through AI, and we're probably not going to lose the kind of the low-end legal secretaries, but we're going to lose a lot of people in the middle who are going off and doing research, who are pulling papers together, who are doing all the kind of the stuff in the middle. So yeah, I think that's where we are heading.
I weirdly like that in a weird way. I know some other people are talking a bit in the chat there, I think, around like, oh, this is kind of scary a little. Tawfik said future trend of designers replacing or merging the PM/PO role. And I felt this recently actually working with developers. They came on board, they're kind of new developers, but you know, they're suggesting components to me. They're sending me UI kits and they're like, hey, this is already designed. It looks great. It's got all the accessibility considerations. It's backed by 100 different papers. That's more than I could probably do. Can we just build this? And it's a really interesting relationship with them, especially now kind of, you know, if I don't get something back to them quick, they're just going to go and build it. And what they build is probably going to work. And I'm noticing a narrative among especially a lot of the developers and our product managers more and more on, yeah, we need this to look good. Our business analysts are driving like the UX message a lot more as well. Our product owners are owning that. We had one of our first meetings with them in a while, and they were the ones pushing design, which I kind of loved in a way.
It's good, but I mean, again, to answer one of the questions, to answer Jeremy's questions on the thread, like I absolutely believe that designers are there to solve problems. But what I'm suggesting is that agency has been taken away. And that agency has been taken away for this reason. So for instance, like most of the design leaders I know in companies report to the head of product. Most of the project managers I know report to the head of product. You have 20 heads of product. So you have 20 product managers reporting into the same person as one head of design. So what? Yeah. So you have a power imbalance. If you have 20 product managers saying, we want to do X, we want to do research, we want to be more strategic, and you have one design leader saying, we need to be more strategic because we solve problems, and you are a product leader that comes from product management, you are going to support your product managers over your design leader. So a lot of the time, a lot of the work I do with the design leaders I work with is that they find themselves in a power imbalance. By the time they get to but by the time the problem gets to them, somebody else with more power in the organization has already decided what gets built. There's this idea of a feature factory. Like, absolutely, designers should be solving problems. But if the product manager is going away and having the conversations with the client, with the users to do customer discovery, if it's only the product manager that's sitting in the roadmap meetings, if it's the product manager interfacing with the leadership team who are deciding what gets built, by the time it comes to design, the decision of what is going to be built has already been made. And if that decision of what's going to be built has already been made, you no longer have the opportunity to be the problem solver. And also, like, the people who want to be the problem solvers are the product managers. The people who want to be the problem solvers are the CPOs. And so there's no motivation for those individuals to give designers the space they need. This is why I talked at the start around one of the ways we need to deal with this is to change the fundamental culture of these organizations at the start. I want to see designers be the first PM, the first product leader, not a CPO that worked in Amazon. Because if your first product leader is a CPO that worked in Amazon, they will hire a second project manager, a third product manager, a fourth product manager. I see teams, this absolutely scares the hell out of me. I see teams where there are 2 PMs to 1 designer. I see teams where there are product teams where every product team have 2 PMs and they're sharing 1 designer between 3 or 4 teams. That, for me, is not sustainable. That is bonkers. But it's supported because the PMs are getting to do all the problem solving, they're getting to do the strategy. And when somebody says to them, do you want to hire another designer? Well, they don't want to hire another designer because that would be giving away the fun bit of work that they've inherited and they want to do. So this power imbalance is a problem. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's desirable. What I'm saying is I actually think it's fucked. I think it's a mess. I think it's awful. But what I'm saying is this is the environment that designers have found themselves in, and we need to figure out ways to work our way out of this because it's not desirable. Somebody mentioned Brian Chesky, and this is a great example. Like, there are a very, very small number of companies like Airbnb that are trying to change this problem. The problem is the reason that Brian Chesky coming out and saying we don't have PMs, you know, in our team was notable is because this is one company out of 1,000 unicorns in Silicon Valley. Like, I would love to say that like that was a dominant position in most organizations, but it's not. The reason all the designers were cheering along the sidelines is not because that's the way things work. It's because of the way they really desperately want them to work. And why does that work in Airbnb? Because it's founded by designers. So what can I do? I want to empower designers to get a seat at the table, to be a founding designer, to be the first designer that's hired really, really early on, that is an investor. Like, if you are a designer and you are invested in companies, people will listen to you. If you are a founder and a designer, people will listen to you. You get to change the culture. It's really difficult to topple this culture unless you can kind of get the inside track. And so that's effectively what I'm saying here.
I love it. I love it. One question. So before we dive into the rest of the questions, Andy, I am fascinated by the title of this talk that we kind of came up with over LinkedIn. This one specifically, the difference of a calling and the difference of a profession, is really what got me, especially coming from, I did my degree in science communication, which is a weird thing in itself, but it has works with a lot of older style professions like psychology, which has been around for, actually not that long in comparison to physical sciences. But what does that mean to go from something like a calling and a profession? What's the difference between those two?
Just giving a thumbs up to Jeremy. Thank you for the opportunity for me to attempt to answer your question. The calling profession thing, I think, is interesting. Like, I come from a generation, I'm kind of Gen X. I come from a generation which was the first generation to have computers. I had a BBC Micro in my junior school, and while everybody was playing playing football outside, I was teaching a little kind of turtle drawing device to draw squares and circles and shapes on a bit of paper. When I got a bit older, I got my first Spectrum computer, and I would be playing computer games from tapes being loaded, and I would be coding out, getting magazines and kind of copying the code to play games. Internet, I was a really early kind of internet user. And so back then, the people who were doing this were hobbyists. There was no profession. There was no job as an internet, a webmaster, a web designer, all the kind of early people that came online were kind of almost like citizen band radio people. They were people that kind of built their radio from parts. You had to kind of know how to build the thing to have a website, to be part of the early internet. So you became hobbyists, you became fans. And I think those early people that came to the internet were also often, a little bit socially awkward. Maybe there was a reason why I was kind of sitting in with the three other nerds at school playing on the computer rather than running around being social and being the kind of the football player. So a lot of the early people on the internet found community. They found other kind of awkward nerds that were really into the same kind of stuff that they were into, the same kind of books, the same kind of movies, the same kind of cultural influences. When I started going to South by Southwest, a conference in 2005, I saw this in the way that the conference evolved over the week. I don't know if anyone's been to South by Southwest, but in the early days, the conference was a mixture, still is today, a mixture of technology at the start and then music. And in the first few years, the first 5 or 6 years, you could tell who was there for the music and who were there for the technology. I know it sounds a bit kind of cliche, but all the technology people for the first week were kind of geeky, kind of glassy wearing, computer kind of nerds. But they were really, really passionate. And as the week progressed, all the beautiful kind of attractive looking, well-dressed, trendy people kind of rocked up. Then in 2008, we had a major economic crisis. And suddenly, all the people, all of the bros out of the big Ivy College is in the US and also the kind of equivalent in the UK, who would have gone into the city to make their millions, couldn't go into the city to make their millions because the economy was decimated. But at the same time, their options were limited. Where would they go? Well, they would go into tech, because all of a sudden you can now enter tech, not because you need to be a technologist. These people weren't programmers, they weren't designers, they weren't geeks. They were the product managers. They were the people that would have got into the city, but now I want to go and work in a startup. I want to go and be the first 100 hire at Twitter because I know that if I'm in the first 100 hire with IPO, I'm going to make $1 million. Now the culture changed. It stopped being the kind of the freaks and the geeks going into tech. It became the cool kids. You go back to South by Southwest 10 years later, you go back to South by Southwest 2010, 2011, 2012. Now it was the musicians who were the scruffy ones. And it was the tech geeks who were wearing the $500 trainers, who were wearing the £1,000 Fitbits. They were the ones that were getting the limos places. They were the ones that kind of like had the look, because they were now in demand. You know, like if you're a musician, you're struggling, you're doing gigs in back rooms or whatever. Now, if you're an engineer and you're getting $500,000 a year, if you're a designer, you're getting $250,000 a year at a tech startup, plus, you know, equity. Like these people were starting to make tons of money, and this attracted more people in, people that were doing it not because they cared necessarily because they were hobbyists, but because they saw this as a profession. I'm not putting a value judgment here. Like it makes total sense. Like if I was a young person, you know, starting off in my career 10 years ago, I wouldn't be wanting to go into a tech company because I saw the philosophical promise of a world wide web where we could all communicate with each other as equals. I'd be shit. Like this is a really cool thing. I play computer games. I use my mobile phone all the time. I really like design. I really like kind of like, you know, doing this kind of stuff. And hell, I can get out of university. I can pay my debt off in a couple of years because an entry level, you know, programmer job is 250K. So it switched from being a calling to a profession. That doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are in it don't care, but it just means that their background and motivation is different. And I think that's something, you know, I think that's just the fundamental of what happens when something goes from a hobby to an industry. Like, you know, it's not being driven by geeks now. Like it's not nerdy people saying, hey, look, you should really kind of get an e-commerce store. I think it's going to be big, and everyone else going, you know, no one's going to buy shoes off the internet. Now it's people going, I just made my first, you know, million at the age of 23 because I joined, you know, X startup and it exited. So suddenly the people that were the subculture have become the dominant culture. And when you become a dominant culture, you become mainstream. And so it's just a natural progression of going mainstream.
I love that. And I don't know why it came to mind, but it made me think of like Gold Rush in terms of tech. But I think the difference there is, as you said, it's kind of become mainstream. It's considered, you know, if you say you've got a job at as a designer, people tend to think, ooh, you're a designer, or I like to think developers get the same thing, but not always as much. But people do, oh, you're a developer, that's cool. And the accessibility of doing design and doing development, especially with the low code, the no code. You know, I did computer science in uni, and that was really useful. But now it's, you know, some of the stuff I learned, it's like I can just boot up something in 10 minutes on a low code thing, hook up Zapier to it, and you got a website, you got a fully functioning app. It's not scalable, but it's
I think this is it. I think the nature of the industry has changed as well. It used to be building, you know, back in the day, it used to be punching holes in punch cards, and it used to be operating in binary. And then we layer on, you know, more tools and more tools and more tools. And now a lot of the you know, all of the AI startups you see coming out, not all of them, but most of them, they're not doing AI. They're pulling together a whole bunch of existing kind of libraries and sources and codes and SDKs. And so I think a lot of it now is less around, I still think it's useful to understand the underlying process, but we are more assembling parts. It also makes sense. Like it's a factory production line, you know, like back in the day, like my dad would be able to open a car bonnet and fix any problem because it was all a bunch of individual components that would fit together. Now it's a whole bunch of black boxes. Like you open a kind of an engine now, or a bonnet now, and you can't even access the things because everything is kind of like tied together because they're big components. They're sitting to other components. They're interchangeable. And that's effectively what development is to a large part these days, is increasingly becoming, is it's becoming chaining a whole bunch of tool sets together in interesting ways. And so, yeah, I think this is definitely true of engineering, and I think it's going to be increasingly true of design. The difficulty is with design, because it's a visual thing, people who also can see stuff. I know this sounds really, really stupid thing to say, but like product people go, oh, well, now the unique mysticism of it has disappeared. Now I don't need to worry about color. Now I don't need to worry about creating components. I can chain a whole bunch of things together. It might not be good, but people have the ability to do it now to a level which is high enough that they can launch things which are good enough that they don't need the kind of necessarily, or believe they need the level of design that designers can deliver. So I think there needs to be a fight back. I think there needs to be a pushback. And I'm not saying this is right. Like I said, I just think it's becoming the dominant way of thinking. And I think we need to do a better job of having pointy elbows and creating room for ourselves.
Wonderful. You reminded me when you said about the car thing. My brother, he's a mechanic, and his father was a mechanic, and I think his father was also a mechanic. And he was telling me he'd learnt cars all over his life, and he's worked in many shops, and they get electric cars in, and none of them can work on them. They're computers. They're not cars anymore. So they have almost none of their knowledge really applies.
Yep. Well, this is it. I mean, like I've got a little Mini, not a particularly flashy car, but when it gets a service, it doesn't have somebody kind of like opening the hood and poking around. The first thing somebody does is plug a laptop into the port and run a diagnostic. It's a bunch of tools chaining together. And actually, if something breaks, you don't fix it. You take the whole part out and you put a whole new black box in. And I think this is where we are at the moment with engineering. What it has done is it's made it much, much faster. It's made it much, much more accessible. Like, this is why designers can, like, the counter to this is why designers can be founders. Like, it used to be the case that you needed to have a technical co-founder to get anything off the ground. Now there are a whole bunch of tools that allow the back end stuff to work. It's usually pretty bad, but you can get a Bubble, you can get a Webflow, you can get a Web Studio to help you get 90% there. And so the barrier has dropped, but with the good stuff, the barrier dropping, meaning that we can do more for less. That also means other people can get access that maybe we might not want or need or appreciate. So yeah.
I'm mindful we've got about a few minutes left. Sorry, I really liked your question, and I think given that Andy has quite a lot of focus on coaching and leadership, would you like to ask your leadership question?
Sure, I'll ask it. So this is all a little bit dark and gloomy for every one of us. So the next question was kind of linked to this perspective as well. So how can we differentiate ourselves as design leaders when we are going from this peak and downfall of the industry? What can we do, and what kind of growth areas do you see?
Again, a really good question. I think there's a bunch of opportunities. So I think if you are earlier in your career, being willing to be the first designer in a startup can be really empowering. Because if you can get in early, if you can be responsible for the success of the company, a couple of things happen. First of all, you build trust with the founder. So the founder now values design. You will hopefully get to, if you get in early, you'll hopefully be able to change the culture. So you can hire more designers. You can make sure that the ratio of designers to engineers or the designers to PMs is correct. Also, what will hopefully happen is if the startup is a success, you will become wealthy. And when you become wealthy, you can then choose whether you want to go and start your own company or whether you want to go and invest in other people's companies. And so I think there is a real opportunity in the early stages of your career to lean into being the only designer. It's challenging because a lot of designers want to be surrounded by other designers. I get it. Like, if you're new in your career, the best place to be probably for your career, for your learning, for your craft skills, is to be the worst designer on a team of 10 designers, because that will make you progress really, really quickly. But the impact you can have being the only designer in a company that doesn't have designers, if you're good, can be overwhelming. If you are a design leader, I think some of the problems I talked about earlier, what typically happens is the reason you become a design leader because you're so frustrated with all the shit you had to put up with as a designer. And so you go, okay, when I become a design leader, I'm going to fix all this. When I have power, I'm going to go and I'm going to fight the good fight and I'm going to solve all these problems. And so you become a leader. And then suddenly all the people you lead are like, oh, this is great. Like, you know, Andy or Sarah has become a leader now, and they pile on all of these impossible goals. You need to have to do this. You need to make sure we have to hire 5 researchers. You need to make sure we need to follow the double diamond process. You need to make sure that, you know, sales never tells us what to build, yada, yada, yada. And you go into battle. And really, really quickly, you find yourself having arguments and fights and unwinnable battles with foes that have got more money, got more power, got more status. And you get disillusioned, and you eventually stop being a design leader and open up a third way coffee shop or bike shop in the Mission because you're fed up with doing all this kind of stuff. The way around this, there are 2 ways. I think, first of all, in larger companies, being a designer rather than a design leader, I think there were 2. I think one of the problems with design is there are two horizons designers work towards. I think most of the UX designers I know are working towards building long-term value for their users. And so they want to do 2, 3, 4 months worth of research because they want to build a product that in 3 or 4 years' time is delivering huge amounts of value to a large number of people. I think that's valuable. I think that's worthy. I think if you're that kind of designer, you should stay into the product stream that is delivering value. But I think there's another kind of designer that is around not creating new value, but helping businesses extract value from what you've got already. Those are kind of growth designers. There's a whole movement of growth design. You are somebody that isn't working in a 6-month or 3-month kind of, you know, a year-long roadmap. You are somebody that has been told, we need to improve the KPIs on retention. We need to improve the KPIs on activation. We need to improve the KPIs on monetization. And we are going to give you the agency that you can pick what you're going to do, and, you know, come back to me in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, and have an experiment that you've run that shows me how you can improve these things. And so these designers are the ones that can really, really quickly make improvements, go back to the business, say, hey, look, we did this cool thing, and now retention's gone up by 2%. That actually means in a year's time, we will have saved you $50 million. Wow. Suddenly people start listening to you. You've saved me $50 million. Great. Do this, do that, do something else. And so I think leaning into growth design, I think is one way that designers can have impact. I think another way is obviously kind of leaning into product leadership. But the other thing I was going to tackle, again, particularly with leaders, is the novice leadership approach is I'm going to go and tell my bosses how they should be treating design, and I'm going to elevate the role of design. That very rarely works. The real approach is to go, okay, I am now part of the leadership team. I am going to be seeing my leadership team as my first team, the team that I report to, the team that I work with. I'm going to build a really amazing bond with sales, marketing, product, engineering, with my CTO. And I'm going to demonstrate how design can be a facilitator of business growth, business success. And as I said before, if you are able to have that first team mentality, your job now is no longer just taking all the gripes of your designers and throwing them at your leadership team time and time and again. Why won't you listen to me? Why won't you listen to me? Your job is to say, we're going to deliver this business success. And oh, by the way, if you want to see more of this, give me a bit more resource. And you deliver that success, you get a bit more resource. You deliver it again, you get a bit more resource. And over time. And so I think for me, it's a waiting game. It shouldn't be like this. I admit, I think our bosses should just get it, but they don't. And so going into battle never works. What you need to do is you need to see that design transformation is a long game that will probably take 7 years. You need to be in it for the long haul. And you need to realize that maybe you'll actually, frustratingly, you'll probably have left by the time the changes happen. Like what I typically see is a design leader will come in, they'll fight for 2 or 3 years, and then they'll leave and somebody else will take over. But you'll leave the company in a much better place than it was when you started. And when that next design leader comes in and starts saying exactly the same thing as you, people will go, oh, maybe it wasn't Sarah just being a bit difficult. Maybe this is a thing. And then the next person comes in and they say the same thing. And over 5, 6, 7, 8 years, people start going, okay, maybe there's a trend here. Maybe there's a bigger thing. And each of those new people that come in, I think of it like kind of pushing a boulder up a hill. It really, really is hard to start. But once you get the momentum going, You might tire, the next person comes and tag teams in, and they've got a bit more energy, and they'll push it faster and faster and faster. The next person comes in, and they push it faster and faster and faster. And eventually the boulder will get to the top of the hill. It might not be on your tour. It might take 7, 8, 9 years to happen, but you have been instrumental in getting that boulder moving. And I think last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to have to kind of jump, is like, your job isn't to convince the whole leadership team. Your job is just to find one person that believes you. And then you've got a team of 2. And then if each of you find one more person, you've got a team of 4. Then each of you find one more person, you've got a team of 8. And over 2 or 3 years, you slowly bring in more followers, more fans, more believers. And the company transforms through that. It transforms through winning hearts and minds on an individual level, rather than going to battle and trying to preach from the pulpit. You know, it's actions, not words, and it's demonstrating value. Like, you don't demonstrate value by saying, hey, look at the Apple stock prices. You demonstrate value by saying, hey, look at our stock prices and what we've done, what the design team has done. And I'll finish on this. Like, my friend Stuart Frisbee was the 5th ever design hire at booking.com. In a 2-year period, he grew the design team from 5 people to 200 people. And he did this because in the first few months of working at booking.com, he was able to demonstrate to the CEO that for every $1 the CEO gave the design team, they'd turn it into 5. He demonstrated that design was a money-making machine. And in that instance, if you were a smart CEO, if you can demonstrate, if I give my design team $1, they turn it into 5. Next time you give them $10, they turn it into 50. Then you give them $100, they turn it into 500. Then you give them $1,000, they turn it into $5,000. And over the course of 2 years, your design team is turning $5 million into $50 million or $100 million or whatever it is. That's how you do it.
Wonderful. I think that's a perfect end. Thank you so much, Andy. We appreciate your time. Thanks for staying over by a few minutes. It's been an absolute delight having you on. I hope it's not too late for where you are now. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't get to answer all of the questions in the chat. I've been scrolling through and there's some really, really great comments there. So thank you very much for bearing with me. If you want to reach out and chat, I'm sure Ben can kind of share my contact details. In the olden days, I would have said contact me up on Twitter, but Twitter's a hellhole now. I am on Threads, I am on LinkedIn. So maybe maybe find me in some of those other channels. And yeah, if you've got any questions or if you've enjoyed the talk and you want to carry on and social, then yeah, find me there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy. I know you got to jump. I'll share your contact details and I'll let you know how the recording goes on this as well after.
Brilliant. Adios. Cool. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye all. Hey, Noya, do you want to stick around? And Susie?
Hey, yeah, absolutely. I was supposed to have a meeting, but
if you need to go to the meeting, that's okay.
But they're not answering, so I think
okay.
I'm good for now. I'll keep an eye on it, but I'm here for now.
Wonderful.
Hey.
Hey guys, good to see you again. Augustine, are you on the call or are you just thought I'd check?
Just muted.
Maybe they're either muted or away from keyboard.
Yeah.
I'll pop them out. That way they can disconnect. But if you're there.
That was amazing. How did you get Andy on here?
Yeah,
it was
that
a
was
really
great.
interesting experience. So I saw him. Let me stop the recording.